Ladies and gentlemen, what a treat we have in store here on the Sports Report, the number one global sports show. And our guest here is one of the latest signees of Odyssey Pro Wrestling. And he has risen from the underclass. He has become the Gangster Lord. He is the king of chaps, and he has become the main event, not just in places like KOW Wrestling, not just in places like BWR and Aftershock and Future Pro, but he has become the main event of UK wrestling, where he's won the KO Wrestling Showcase Championship of the World. And he's also been the BWR Cruiserweight Champion of the World. And he's arguably pound for pound one of the best wrestlers around. And without further ado, here on the Sports Report, the number one global sports show, and that's the Rat King, the former KO Wrestling Showcase Champion of the World, and the BWR Cruiserweight Champion, that is none other than the Rat King, 2-Bit. My friend, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. How are you?
It's an honor to have you, and I really felt the pressure in this one to come up with a good intro, because in your matches, for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportanarium that has not seen 2-Bit wrestle, you actually do your own intros. So I felt this one in a lot of ways was almost like when Mr. Kennedy, I don't know if you remember Mr. Kennedy in Impact TNA and the WWE, what he used to do is he would actually do his own intros. And, well, you don't do it quite as Mr. Kennedy would do it, but you still did your own intros. So I definitely felt the pressure to have a good intro for you. So hopefully it was good enough for you, and it's a tremendous honor to have you. And congratulations on being one of the latest signees of Odyssey Pro Wrestling. And talk about Odyssey Pro Wrestling, what got you involved in it, and what your goals are here in Odyssey.
Well, thank you very much. In fact, just before I start with Odyssey, I think I'm going to have to hire you to do my own intros for me before I come out, to be honest with you. But with Odyssey, you know what, Odyssey, I'm really looking forward to working with Odyssey. Markham Pro Wrestling, it holds a very special place in my heart. A little bit of history for you. I started at KOW. That's why I trained. That's why I came up. That's why I debuted and started shows. And it was about 2017 when I was fortunate enough to get a place on. At the time, it was Alpha Omega. That's who were running out of Markham. I was fortunate enough to get booked at Alpha Omega. And I went to a show. I wasn't booked on that show. I was just going to get promo pictures and, meet everybody, see how it was. And I was lucky enough to get put on the show because there was a bit of a mix-up and a couple of the lads couldn't make it to the show. And I ended up wrestling this guy called Craig Collins. I'm sure you've heard lots about Craig. One of the most underrated guys in the Northwest. Yeah. And I was lucky enough to get this match with Craig. At this point, I'm quite green. I haven't really started gymming it. I'm not a big guy, I'm about 16 years old, stood there. And Craig comes out to his big 2-year, he's been out for a couple of years out of a shoulder injury. One of the most over guys in this company comes back and returns, and he basically just kicks my ass. Everybody is loving it. And then there's this big distraction. I ended up rolling him up. And it was a big, massive shock victory. 2-Bit just beat Craig Collins. So what's going on? And you know what? It went on. This whole storyline went on. I beat Craig Collins. I said it every single show. I beat Craig Collins. I beat Craig Collins. And it went on for about 16 months until the last ever Alpha Omega show, where we built up to this big last match, me and Craig again. And, this is where I've improved and I've become bigger and I've become stocky and I'm a better wrestler now. And I ended up beating him. Clean. And that was very good. That was a lot of fun. And you know what? And that's why Markham holds a special place in my heart, because, I've worked for a couple of companies now, a couple of different companies up and down the country or whatever. And there's never been anywhere like Markham where there's been such a storyline and everyone had a story. Everyone had something to look forward to. Everyone, in the atmosphere of Markham. And the crowd are insane. When Ryan Hunter lost the championship, Ryan Hunter, who's probably the most over guy in Markham Pro Wrestling history, when he lost that belt, and I think half of the crowd were crying actual tears of sadness, that's when you know that's a good crowd. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to Odyssey. And obviously, I've got a lot of history in Markham now with the whole thing with Craig. I don't think I'm going to be going back and bragging about beating Craig so much anymore. But it's going to be really cool to go back, going from being a 16-year-old green wrestler, short hair, no beard. I'm sure you've seen all the promo pictures. And coming to where I am now, and the training and then the last year especially from moving to Manchester, and the stuff that I've learned from all these different guys and all these different guys and girls, and what I know now and what I can bring to Markham now is going to be so different, and it's going to be really cool to see that evolution from what I used to be to what I am now. to what Tu BYT is now. I'm really looking forward to Odyssey.
So am I. And there's a lot of excitement I see with the company. And it reminds me a lot of ways in terms of the territory in Morecambe, very similar to where I am in the New York area. And the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area has always been a hotbed for professional wrestling and wrestling territories. And I think in a lot of ways, what I see from Odyssey, Tu BYT, tell me your thoughts on this, is very similar to what I've seen here in New York, where there's such a buzz when it comes to the number of wrestlers you guys have. Obviously, we talked with Synergy last week. We've talked with Rick. We've talked with RP Davis. We've even talked with a few wrestlers who are not in Odyssey Pro Wrestling, and they all agree that there's a hotbed of wrestling right now in Morecambe, and that's why I think everybody's excited to see Odyssey Pro Wrestling. And does that add for you also that buzz because you're going somewhere where you know that there's a fan base that is starving? They're ready for wrestling, on top of the fact that we've gone, for the most part, a year without wrestling. I mean, it's very territorial based, and it reminds me, again, very similar crowd-wise to New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania in that sense. I mean, what's your thoughts on all that?
I completely agree with you. I'm not going to say that Morecambe is anywhere near as big as New York or Pennsylvania or anything like that, but Morecambe has got a big history of wrestling, and I know that for a fact. Going way back to when I must have been like 5 years old. And you've got like XWA and Styx and Johnny Fear and all these big names in Morecambe wrestling. And even if they weren't massive names in the rest of the UK or worldwide, in Morecambe, they are big names. They are the names that the Morecambe wrestling fans know. They were the stars of Morecambe wrestling. And, you know, that whether they hated him or whether they loved him, it didn't matter. And, you know, going on, you then moved into paid promotions. Yeah, that's where people like Craig were coming in, Craig Collins. Craig Collins became one of the biggest rising stars in Morecambe very easily, as he well deserved. And that's where you go into Alpha Omega. And Alpha Omega was very, very good for story. Very good for story and very good for building these massive characters up. Very, like the 80s characters you'd see in WWE, where they'd be larger than life characters. That's what Alpha Omega Morecambe Wrestling was. These larger than life characters and the crowd going absolutely crazy for them. Never seen a crowd like Morecambe, and I can't wait to go back. And yeah, I think you're completely right. And then obviously coming back into Odyssey now, it's been a long time for Morecambe without any wrestling, longer than just the pandemic, because there was a big period in between where there was Alpha Omega stopped, and then Target came in with a couple of shows, and then there's been this period where there's been no wrestling, but then Odyssey was going to come back and bring wrestling back to Morecambe, and then COVID's hit, and now they are starving. They are starving for wrestling. And the thing about Odyssey is that in this time we've gotten, rather than sitting and just waiting for shows to come back up, Odyssey have upped their production. They're upping their production. And I know this for a fact because I know the promoters. I'm talking to the promoters. And they're upping the production value, the promo shots, the videos that they're creating. Everything's being upped. And you know what? I think that's just going to make the fans want it more. Yeah, I think you're completely right.
Absolutely. And we're very excited for Odyssey Pro Wrestling, and we know that we are all going to set sail when Odyssey Pro Wrestling starts here later in 2021. And one of those reasons why we're very excited about Odyssey Pro Wrestling is Tu BYT. And Tu BYT, the Rat King, is definitely somebody that has made a difference in the wrestling community. He has won a few championships already in such a short amount of time, and he's one of the pound-for-pound top fighters in the UK, one of the top wrestlers in the UK, and that is why we're extremely honored to have him here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and we're talking all things Odyssey Pro Wrestling with former BWR Cruiserweight Champion of the World and KOW Showcase Champion Tu BYT. And Tu BYT, I gotta ask you this question because I heard you talk a lot about the pandemic, and we've obviously talked with a number of your different colleagues and a number of different other pro wrestlers in the business who aren't in Odyssey, but they're out there. And it's been a long time since we've had wrestling. And since the pandemic, how have you kept yourself ready? Because you had a lot of momentum before the pandemic. You were dominating in KO Wrestling. You were dominating in BWR. I mean, you literally became the main event. I mean, you were literally a main event wrestler in such a short amount of time. I mean, take a step back for a minute and think about when you debuted to where you are today. I mean, you legitimately have become the main event. So in order to get ready for whenever that call comes for when Odyssey Pro Wrestling can start here in 2021, how have you kept yourself ready during the pandemic?
Well, I haven't just sat there, and I'm not just here waiting. I've been watching wrestling. I've been watching a lot of wrestling as well. I've been talking to other wrestlers about wrestling, and I just want to sit there and I just want to watch wrestling. I just want to learn. I want to learn as much as I can. Do you know what I mean? And as well as that, fitness wise, I've been on the fitness plans more than ever. They're more than I ever have in my entire life. And I mean, thankfully, I think I put that down to, I'm sure Ricky and everybody else will have talked about the 36-week program with Nush, where, you know, they're going on calorie cuts and they're going on bulking and they're doing this whole program. And from that, that's inspired me. And I've been doing my own research. And in the last year, I've done a cut, I've done a bulk. I'm now back onto a cut. I'm on a cut for another couple of weeks. I'm planning to bulk up. And hopefully by the time I'm finishing my bulk up, that's when the shows are going to be back. And that's when I'm going to be in really good shape. Better shape than I ever have been in my life to be coming back to wrestling.
How important is that? Because we've talked with a number of different wrestlers, and we've even heard some wrestlers on different interviews and different radio shows, and they've said that that first bump that they're going to take is actually going to be a lot tougher than any other bump that they've felt, maybe since they've trained, because of the long layoff. I mean, you were wrestling a few days a week, or at least once a week, to go from that to where you've gone a year where you haven't had a match. I mean, even now, if you look at it with WWE and AEW and Impact, I mean, those guys and gals would wrestle 3 and 4, 5 times a week even. To now, they're wrestling just once a week, maybe twice a week when they have the pay-per-view. And you got to think that's a shock to the body. I mean, for you, I mean, what's that going to be like when you take that first bump? Because we've asked a couple of different guys about that. We talked about that with Synergy on last week's show. We'd asked Declan McCarthy that same question a few weeks ago. Even with Rick and RP Davis and Jackson Hart also, we'd asked him that on last week's show. I mean, is that something you've thought about, where you take that first bump and what's that going to be like?
Honestly, not the kind of person to be thinking about the first bump back. Now that you're saying it, I am thinking, oh, that's not going to be fun. But look, it's something you've got to do. It's just something you've got to get through the pain. You've got to brush it off, because, you know, once you've taken that first bump, it's all up. It's uphill from there, or downhill, whichever the good way is. You know, I take that first bump, the second bump will be easier, the third bump will be easier, the fourth bump, it'll get easier and easier, and I know that because I've been through it before, because I've taken my first bump before. And I mean, going pre-COVID, there was a point in time where, you know, I was trying to get the training as much as I could. There was a point in time where I was training at least twice a week, if not, you know, 3-4 times in a week, and then going to shows on the weekend too. And so I know that my body can handle this. I've just got to build myself up to it again. Another big thing about coming back to wrestling as well, another big thing is cardio. You know, I can sit here and I can do as much better as I want all day long. Nothing prepares you for in-ring cardio. It's like a completely different kettle of fish. And so I've been doing cardio, and I've been trying to keep up with the cardio as much as I can, but I know it's going to take me back a little bit. And all I can do is just train, and maybe not train full on when I first come back, but train and slowly bump it up and bump it up and bump it up just before my in-ring return. That's the plan.
Absolutely. And your matches are a little different than some of your other colleagues in Odyssey Pro Wrestling, because if anybody's seen 2Bit's matches, which I highly recommend you go do so on YouTube, 2Bit wrestles 25 to 30 minute or even 35 minute up matches. So watching a 2Bit match is not like watching any other match. It reminds me in a lot of ways of watching an RVD-like match. It reminds me of watching a little bit of a Chris Benoit match. It reminds me a little bit of watching a CM Punk type of match. I mean, he's up there in that category. I think that's why in such a short amount of time, he's had the success that he's had. And then I wanted to ask you then that question too, because you debuted a few years ago. Your first match, you beat the War Machine, Craig Collins, who you mentioned, we know is also in Odyssey Pro Wrestling. We're probably going to be talking with him in the very near distant future. And yet here you are right before the pandemic. You're the Cruiserweight champion. You won the Showcase belt in KO Wrestling, and you essentially became a main event guy. Do you ever take a step back, and especially during the pandemic, think about the fact that in such a short amount of time, you were where you were to where you were before the pandemic, where you were one of the top guys in the different companies that you worked in? I mean, is that something that you thought about a lot?
Well, yeah, definitely. especially during lockdown. Lockdown's been a big time for looking back on where I've come from and where I am now. And I can sit and I can watch matches from years ago and I can go, oh my God, I'm so much better now. Do you know what I mean? And the improvements that I've made, especially like I was saying, when I've moved to Manchester in the last year and being able to train with places like Future Shock and Fighting Spirit. And you know what? Fighting Spirit was probably one of the best places to train in the entire country, along with Future Shock as well. And all these different places that I'm now learning so much from, and all these different contacts and people that I've met in the last year. And you know what? Yeah, I've been looking back a lot and how I can, but more importantly, I've been looking to the future and I've been looking to how I can improve and how I can carry on this momentum and how I can come back straight into the main event and how I can come and start debuting all over the country, really make a star, really make a name for myself in the UK, as well as that, yeah.
You're too big. You are the main event.
Damn right, yeah.
And if you don't tell us that, we'll make sure everybody else knows that, not just in the UK, but the rest of the world here on Sportanarium. So listen, let your heart not be troubled. If you forget to call yourself the main event on this show, we'll make sure that everybody knows that you are the main event and you've definitely proven yourself in such a short amount of time. That's what's so impressive about you, is that sometimes it takes a lot of time when you debut to really get your feet under you. But you've shown that ability. I mean, you've been in a lot of different main events. You've had the feuds with Will Carter. You've had the feuds with Lucas Neon. I mean, you've been involved with Rick, obviously. There's a lot of different wrestlers that you've been involved with in such a short amount of time. I think that's what makes it so impressive with what you've done. And I was curious also for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium that may not know why you are the main event in such a short amount of time is, what got you into wrestling?
Well, of course, growing up, I mean, I'm only 20 years old now. So only growing up, I was coming up in the PG era, where like The Undertaker and John Cena was quite heavy at the time. And I remember watching Undertaker, and Undertaker mesmerized me. But I think he mesmerized all of us, especially when I was 12 years old. The character was insane to me. I didn't really get it. Like, was he dead? Was he not? I didn't know, but it was great. And somebody else who I really loved was Rey Mysterio. The luchador was insane. I loved the flips. I loved the ranas. It was great. They were my favorite bit. And from that, I always grew up liking wrestling. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd go into, but I grew up liking it and enjoying it. And then there was a sort of period during school where I had a friend who you might know now as Lucas Neon. My friend Lucas Neon, who was in my year with me, he started wrestling training. He started talking about it to me. I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. So I came down to KOW and I started training and I loved it. And I never stopped. And that was when I was 13 years old. And here we are now.
Wow. I mean, think about that, ladies and gentlemen. 2BYT is only 20 years old. I mean, we've talked with RPD and we've talked with Rick. I mean, not to say that they're old, but, they're in their 30s. I mean, they got into the business kind of late. I mean, we talked with even Declan McCarthy. Declan McCarthy got into it late 20s, and yet here you are in such a short amount of time. I mean, it was almost as if you were born into wrestling. I mean, it was almost as if that was what you were going to do, and that's what you were put on this earth to do. And then what's that been like, being a wrestler, because you're so young still and you've had so much success, as we've alluded to? I mean, were there certain wrestlers when you started training that you most specifically emulated?
It's definitely been strange growing up with wrestling. Like, wrestling has always been there. Even through the entire growing up process, wrestling has always been there. During my first heartbreak, wrestling was there. During everything I've ever been through, wrestling's been there for me. And that's probably why I love it so much. That's probably why I'm so obsessed with it. It's crazy seeing, I don't know if you know who Chris Ridgway is, but I mean, he was recently on the WWE Network just the other night, challenging for the Progress World title. He was there at my first session. He taught me how to run my ropes in my first session, and seeing like where Chris has gone is insane, and seeing like the progress that he's made. And again, like people like Ricky started, well, I know he did a bit of training before I started, and then sort of stopped and came back a bit afterwards. But like, again, like Ricky, seeing where Ricky's gone is great. And yeah, so I'd say, there are people that I emulated at the start, especially the people who had a big influence on me, Chris, like Ricky, especially when Ricky was taking me up to training in other places as well. And then as well as that, yeah, again, like Will Carter and Lucas Neon as well, they've had a massive influence on me too. As we've all grown up together, we all started at the same time, all about 13 years old. We all started training together. We've all come up in wrestling together. You know what? We've all influenced each other. We've all bounced ideas off each other. We've all grown up together in wrestling. And that's what's great about it, is we've all made these improvements together.
And you guys have definitely made improvements and some. And speaking of Rick Marcus, the Cumbrian Outlaw, and a man who's done a lot, obviously being a world champion, and he's been one of my favorite wrestlers to watch now over these past few weeks, and it was a tremendous honor to have him here on the Sports Report to talk about Odyssey Pro Wrestling and all the great things that he's done. And what's that been like, being with Rick in the ring and being alongside him? Because we've obviously interviewed, again, some of your colleagues at Odyssey, but they haven't wrestled with him. They haven't been in the ring with him. They know him, obviously, but they don't know him to the level that you know him. So for a worldwide audience here on Sportanarium, talk about Rick Marcus. What's that been like teaming with him? And what do you think he means to Odyssey Pro Wrestling?
Rick's great. Rick's a great guy, and he's a great wrestler too. Obviously, I've known him since practically when he first started. I've seen him come in from taking his, I mean, maybe not his first bump, but his first bump coming back. And I've seen him learn, and I've seen him improve and progress, and where he is now. The same as he's done with me, really. But like getting to see where he's come from is great. And knowing him on a personal level too. And even when I was going through I wasn't going through great stuff, he was there for me. When he wasn't going through great stuff, I was sort of there for him as well. That makes a bond, And even though in the last year, maybe I've met loads of people, I've met all these great people from the Northwest scene. Rick's one of the people who means quite a lot to me because he's from where I started. He's from my roots. And you know what? Seeing his improvements is great, but seeing where he is now is even better. Because I know Rick, and I know that he's been on this 36-week physique, and I know he's in the best shape of his life. I know he's been talking to Chris Brooker, who does a lot of sessions, and his character and his promos and everything is so good right now. The promo he did for the Target Championship tournament, great promo. And you know what? I'm really excited to see him in Odyssey because he's not going to be the Rick Marcus that I knew back in KOW. He's going to be an even better version of himself. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. You know what? I really hope that I can work with him in Odyssey because I really want to wrestle him again because it was great wrestling him before. But I really want to wrestle this new Rick. Do you know what I mean?
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we heard it first here on the Sports Report.
I think when lockdown comes out, when it all goes away, I really hope that Rick's going to be one of these guys who really take their place in pro wrestling and the Brit West scene, especially in the Northwest. I really hope, he starts getting bookings everywhere around the UK. And you know what? He means a lot to Odyssey, and I know that. I think he's going to be good in Odyssey. Maybe not better than me, but he's going to be good.
I think, again, ladies and gentlemen, we might have heard it first here on the Sports Report. Could we see maybe a match here for set sail, Odyssey Pro Wrestling? Could we see a 2-bit versus Rick Marcus? I mean, that's pay-per-view, main event-like quality. I mean, we talked about last week, Synergy versus RP Davis and a partner of his choice. Could we also see in the double main event, the former KOW World Heavyweight Champion, Rick Marcus, the Cumbrian Outlaw, versus former KOW Showcase belt winner, and also BWR Cruiserweight Champion? The main event, 2-bit, the Rat King, the Gangsta Lord, the King of Chaps. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, this is definitely not an underclass match on the card. This is a main event worthy, double main event, it sounds like, for Odyssey Pro Wrestling. So I think we're breaking everything here when it comes to Odyssey Pro Wrestling on the Sports Report. And that's why we're honored to have on the Sports Report the #1 global sports show. And that's the main event, the former BWR Cruiserweight Champion of the World, and the latest Odyssey Pro Wrestling star, and that's Tu BYT. As I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice. And for more information on the Sports Report, you can go to sportsreportx.com and listen to all of our archives. You can go to soundcloud.com/the Sports Report 2019. You can also check us out now on YouTube on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show. You can subscribe to our page on YouTube. And as always, a huge shout out to the entire team here on Sportanarium, including Lakey, Arv, Dave, Danny, Dale, Sean, Steve, Susie, who's celebrating a birthday, Sasha, Connor, Martin, Addie, who we cut a promo for his Sunday night night chill out session show. So want to make sure the entire team at Sportanarium is recognized. And of course, you can follow Sportanarium on Twitter and Instagram at Sportanarium. You can like Sportanarium on Facebook at Sportanarium Media and subscribe to the Sportanarium YouTube page where you can find sports report content, as Sportanarium has over 48,000 subscribers now. You can subscribe to the Sportanarium YouTube page at Sportanarium, and you can also subscribe now to the Sportanarium TV YouTube page where you also see content with Odyssey Pro Wrestling stars like Rick Marcus, like RPD, RP Davis, and of course, most importantly, you can check the Sports Report Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, 5 to 7 Eastern Time, 10 to 12 UK time at Sportanarium.com, and you can now also go to Sportanarium.com/player where you're automatically plugged right in to the shows anytime, 24/7, 365. You name a show, it's on there. So all you got to do is go to Sportanarium.com or Sportanarium.com/player, and you can hear myself in 2-Bit and a number of the great Odyssey Pro Wrestling stars. And we are very honored to have here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show and the #1 global radio station here on Sportanarium. That is the latest start for OP-Dub. OP-Dub, 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 Odyssey Pro Wrestling. That is the main event, 2-Bit, and we're talking all things related to his career and all things related to the future of Odyssey Pro Wrestling. 2-Bit, after hearing you talk about Rick's promos and talking about everything else going on, it made me think about how good your promos are. I remarked to a couple of different of your colleagues in Odyssey Pro Wrestling and to you before we went on the air here, they're almost very ECW 1998 to like 2000. Like there's something raw about them. There's something very, I guess they would be old school now, but at that time ECW was ahead of the curve. And to me, ECW now still feels very 2021, but your promos are as good as anybody's out there. And after hearing you talk about Rick's promo for Target Pro Wrestling and their belt, I got to ask you, I mean, how do you do so well in those promos? And how do you come up with all those different packages that you've come up with here over the past couple of years?
Well, it's been a lot of different influences, I'm going to say. You know, obviously, when I first started, it was sort of, there's an entire backstory to Tube, and there's an entire history to Tube. And, you know, in order to give these promos, I've really got to get into Tube. I've really got to get into the mindset. And you know what? I think about the backstory, and I think about how Tube feels about people. And I think about how Tube, you know, his perception of everything. And he just hates people. And an entire reason, not just because he's an evil guy, but because he grew up in a rough area. He grew up on the council estate. I don't know if you have the council estates in America. I think, did you call them public housing?
Yeah, they call them, the term that they call them is affordable housing, quote unquote.
There you go, that's the one, yeah. Yeah, you know, a very rough area. You know, he starts getting involved with the wrong kind of kids around on the street. You know, he starts delivering these packages. He starts going around to the club selling sort of odd sort of things. You know what? He doesn't want to live that life anymore. And wrestling is the only thing that's going to get him out of that life. Because he isn't going to get a job. With his record, he ain't getting a job anywhere else, okay? So he fights because he has to. Two-Bit fights because he has to, okay? And so that's why he hates everybody. Because everybody will sit there and boo him. And will laugh at him and it'll make jokes about him, but they don't understand what he knows. They haven't seen what he's seen. They're very simple in Two-Bit's head. So yeah, he hates everybody. That's where the promos come from. There has been a lot of different influences and a lot of different advice I've received from a lot of different people. Chris Brooker being one of them. Chris Brooker's great for that sort of thing. He's great for ideas and promo sessions and everything. And then on top of that, you've got Sam Bailey, who is the person that trains everybody at Future Shock in Manchester. He was the one that really gave me the idea for the Target promo. His advice was, because I sent him the original promo, and he gave me a lot of pointers and advice on it. And something he suggested was go for an NWO sort of style promo, you know, with the different shots, the different camera shots, very vignette-y sort of style, very raw content. And so that's what I went for. And I just sort of let Two-Bit unleash. That's what came out of it.
Definitely shown that you've been unleashed to the public and you've definitely held your own in these promos, and there's some of the better promos that I've seen again. And I could definitely see where Chris is coming from, because you do have that very raw NWO-ish. I still say more ECW vibe to you, because I think you kind of fit more into ECW, because I was a little bit more of an ECW fan than the NWO, but I could certainly see that. And I was also curious when it comes to the logo that you have. I mean, mean, you're one of the few wrestlers I think we have in Odyssey that already has their logo designed and it's ready to go. I mean, I have to say your logo is very well done. I mean, how important was it for you to have a logo?
It was very important, yeah. It's my own brand. I want to brand myself as much as I can to as many people as I can. And having something that really yells 2-bit is something that I wanted. And so about a year ago when I came up with Rat King, and obviously Rat King because with the backstory of 2-bit, 2-bit lived with the rats, and 2-bit hates people so much that he doesn't want to be classed as a person. He prefers rats over people. And so that's why 2-bit is the Rat King. And I think that really embodies what 2-bit is. And from that, I had a friend who was doing an art degree, and I basically just messaged her and asked if she'd draw me up this logo, and she did. And I thought, yeah, it's great. And all I wanted was very gritty rat. I just wanted a gritty rat with the bandana on as well. It's a very big symbol of the gangs in the UK. That's where the logo came from. I want people to look at that logo and I want people to be worried. I want people to sort of go, oh my God, and be almost taken aback by the logo. Know that I'm not just some other wrestler, but I'm here to knock people out, okay? I'm here to show up and beat people up and cause them pain. I'm not here to mess about. Do you know what I mean?
Well, you've definitely shown that you give out a lot of pain to a lot of wrestlers out there because you've been into matches that they're definitely very extreme. They're very hardcore. And a few of those matches that come to mind for me is obviously your feud with the unhinged Will Carter, which you talked about. And I was watching a few of those matches here over the weekend. And why was that feud with Will Carter so important? Because I think in a lot of ways, those matches, and I know you talked about Will growing up with him into the business and your relationship with him, but I think that's kind of the hallmark, the textbook of what you can expect from a 2-bit match in terms of what you do in the ring and who you are. I mean, talk about your feud with Will Carter for the Showcase title, and why was that feud so important and stand out?
That feud with Will, it's another thing that holds a special place in my heart. That's because me and Will are quite close. We're quite close friends, and he's done a lot for me as a person. And so because we're so close, because at the time, a couple of years ago, neither of us were on as many shows as I might be on now. It wasn't a case of, if I get hurt in this show, I'm going to have to worry about the show next week. Obviously, if I got majorly injured, but we weren't taking risks like that. But I mean, if I get a black eye, it's fine. I wasn't too bothered. And so he said, okay, let's go out there and let's just give it everything. Let's just absolutely go ham on each other, Let's just really, really beat each other out. You know what I mean? And in fact, I remember there was a big spot we did. I'm screaming in his face and I'm screaming in his face. This wasn't the no DQ match. This was a different match. I was screaming in his face and everything. And the crowd were really coming up. And I go up and I G up to go hit him. And he gave me this ginormous super kick, kicked me right in the eye, gave me a black eye for 2 weeks. And I look back on it and it's almost like a nice memory. And the reaction that got off the crowd as well, it's almost heartwarming. The crowd loved that so much. I mean, not for me, but, for them. It just felt good. It felt good to be able to go out there and just give it everything and listen to the crowd roar. And then it leading all the way up to the no DQ match as well. Obviously, I beat him for the Showcase Championship. I did it very evil. I pretended that my leg was hurt. I don't know if you saw that match, but I pretended my leg was injured. And while his back was turned, never turn your back on 2-bit, but while his back was turned, I came up and I hit him for the 1, 2, 3. And I won the trophy. And so it went on and it went on. And it came all the way up to this no DQ match. And me and Will work really well together because we've been wrestling each other for years now, years and years, ever since we first started training together. So getting to do my first ever main event and becoming the main event of KOW and doing it with Will was special to me. And being able to do a no DQ match as well. I'm glad it was no DQ because it gave us so much more to play around with, so many more spots to do and so much more, getting the weapons out and being able to attack each other. And it was almost as if Will finally got his redemption on me. For all of the years of me being so bad to him, he finally got his revenge. Obviously, I ended up winning at the end, but he got to slam me into Lego and put me through a table. And again, that's something I look back on fondly because listening to the crowd go crazy for me hitting that Lego and going through the table, it's very heartwarming. And it makes me quite happy to look back on it.
And there was a lot of spots in that match. Obviously, both of you guys with those kendo-looking sticks, and obviously the different spots where you held them up into a power bomb, almost a reverse power bomb, and then the different spots where you guys rolled each other up. And in the match, you guys were fighting outside the ring for, I think, at least like 2 or 3 minutes. I mean, there was a lot of different spots in that match. I mean, that was a match that I hope anybody who likes wrestling goes out and checks out because it's really a great match. You can actually find it on Will's YouTube YouTube page, and obviously there's a lot of content on your YouTube page as well, which you can do. Subscribe at 2BYT and find out 2BYT Wrestling on why he is going to be one of the premier wrestlers, not just for the UK, but in the business. And then obviously we've also alluded to it, but that TLC match with Lucas Neon, I mean, another match that very few wrestlers we see do anywhere. I mean, obviously we think of TLC, we think of the Dudleys, the Hardys, and Edge and Christian, but you guys had your own version of that. And talk about your memories of that with Lucas Neon.
Again, a very special match. In fact, it was the show following the no DQ I had with Will Carter. So I was doing 2 main events on the track, both no DQ matches. But that was good, and I was happy that I had the match with Will, who I grew up with, and then I was even happier to again have it with Tom as well, Lucas Neon, to have it with Lucas Neon. Again, that was a lot of fun. Especially, I went through another table again. And unfortunately, this is where I lost the Showcase Championship after taking a big RKO off a ladder through a table. But the reaction to me losing and Lucas Neon winning was insane. Everybody was off their seats. Everybody was screaming and chanting. And as sad as it was to lose my trophy, it was good to see the crowd so hyped. It was good to see the crowd so happy and so ecstatic about Lucas Neon winning. And getting to see that, I knew that I'd done a good job of being in the main event. That was all that mattered, really. Although it was sad that I lost the trophy.
It was sad you lost.
But getting to work with Lucas Neon... It was fun as well, because Lucas Neon is, again, he's one of the underrated guys. You know, he only works in KOW, but he could work so many other places. And not just because he can wrestle, like he can work fine, but the way he interacts with the crowd he's one of the best in KOW for interacting with the crowd. Like, everybody loves him. Everybody loves Lucas Neon. And he goes out and everybody screams his name. Do you know what I mean? Because he's so over, because he has that connection with the crowd, because he can look at the crowd and they will come up for him. And the way he moves around the ring and carries himself as well. And it's unfortunate that he's not booked in more places, but hopefully when lockdown comes up, hopefully he'll start getting out there more, you know?
We certainly hope he does, because he's a wrestler we'd like to see wrestle a lot more often, but hopefully he loses to 2BYT, because we want to see 2BYT have all the titles, or as many titles as possible. And that leads me then to, what was that feeling like winning your first belt, the BWR Cruiserweight title? I know you had the Showcase, but that was a trophy. Now you had a championship belt. You actually had the belt around your waist, around your shoulders. I mean, what did that mean to you to have your first title right before the pandemic and winning the BWR Cruiserweight title?
It meant a lot. And, you know, winning the Showcase Championship, that was great. That was a great feeling. And I really felt like I worked up to that. And, you know, the years of training and getting onto the shows and wrestling my way up to that, you know, I felt well earned, and that was good. And, you know, getting onto an Alpha Omega and getting to wrestle in Morecambe and the whole storyline that happened there, and finally getting to beat Craig at the end. Again, like, that was immense. That was great. And all these other memories I've got in wrestling, like, it's so special to me. But the winning the BWR Cruiserweight belt is almost like something completely different, because whereas, you know, KOW, that's where I started, that's where I came up, that's where I trained. Morecambe was where I got to. That was like the closest promotion that wasn't KOW. You know, it all grew up there. But BWR was, you know, BWR's on the opposite end of the country. I got onto BWR because they did an invitational tournament sort of thing for the Youth and Revolt tournament, and I put my name forward for it, and they chose me. And from that tournament, I ended up being the only one that they've taken back since. And obviously that led to me winning the Cruiserweight belt, and that was great. And so it almost felt like I've made it all there on my own. Obviously, there's been loads of help from so many people to make me who I am now, but it almost felt like I got that belt because of the work that I put in, and I almost earned it all on my own. And that feeling was the best, you know? Getting to wrestle at the time, it was Joe Nelson, who's now doing his own thing, but Joe Nelson and Robbie X, 2 of the best pro wrestlers in the entire country, was crazy as well. Like, that was an insane experience. And I hope to get to work them again, because they're amazing. And I hope to get to work a lot more people in the Brit Rest scene. But getting to work with them too, it just made it so much more special to then win the belt off Robbie.
And congratulations to you, my friend. And we certainly look forward to you winning many, many more titles, because we know that you are the main event. You are the Gangster Lord, and you are the King of Chaps. And that's why we're honored to have here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, for a few more minutes. That is our main event, and that is 2 BYT. The latest star for OP Dub, Odyssey Pro Wrestling, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and we're here on Sportanarium, the #1 global radio station, talking all things related to Odyssey Pro Wrestling with Tu BYT, the latest star for the very, very burgeoning Odyssey Pro Wrestling company, which we cannot wait to set sail with later this year. And I got to ask you, Tu BYT, on a couple of different guests that we've had on the show here over the past couple of weeks who are also with Odyssey Pro Wrestling. And the first I want to ask you about is the team of Synergy, and that's Troy Barnum and Anderson. And obviously, I know that you guys haven't worked together in the ring, but Synergy is a team that I've really become familiar with, obviously, over the past few weeks working with Odyssey. I'm really excited to see what they're going to do in Odyssey Pro Wrestling. I was curious what you think about the team of Anderson and Troy Barnum. So what was your thoughts on Anderson and Barnum and what we can expect from them in Odyssey Pro Wrestling?
Yeah, I've never got to work them before, but I've trained with them before. Ever since they moved into Manchester, they've been one of the guys. Somehow they already knew who I was, which was great. And they were one of the people in Manchester. They were one of the guys in Manchester who really welcomed me in with open arms, and I really appreciated that. But yeah, they're, as a tag team, they're great. I could see them going into Odyssey and eating up that competition. I can see them just demolishing through everyone else because they are both massive. And Troy is ginormous. And I mean, you can look at promo pictures and you can look at videos online and everything, but you see him in person and he's an actual beast. And the same goes for Anderson as well. And I've trained with them before. I haven't had matches on shows with them, but I've had training matches with them, and they work like absolute beasts. And considering the size of them, the way that they move, the way that they can throw people around as well, you know what? It's like nothing else that's on the scene right now. And you get some big guys on the scene, but these guys, they remind me of Craig Collins almost. They're big, they're powerful, and they're fast. And I can just see them absolutely eating through everything Odyssey is going to throw at them.
It's easy to see why they're the Superman and the strongman of Synergy and why they're going to probably dominate the tag team division. And they've already laid out the challenge to RPD. So RPD is definitely on the clock, and he's going to definitely have to figure out who he's going to tag with. And I compare Synergy almost to the Steiner brothers and what they can do in the ring. Well, you remember Scott Steiner could do the Hurricanrana and the Frankenstein, and the way he could move in the ring. And he was like this big, imposing star that, had the background being a Michigan wrestler, and Rick Steiner himself wasn't too bad either. I mean, so a lot of ways, I think Anderson and Troy remind me very similar to the Steiner brothers. That's why I kind of pulled out my Steiner brothers wrestling card from WCW when we did the promo to introduce them formally for Friday's show. And obviously, I got to ask you about one of my guys, and we've interviewed him about his boxing career, and we've also interviewed him about being in Odyssey Pro Wrestling, and that is obviously former champion in boxing and one of the latest stars in Odyssey Pro Wrestling, RPD. That's RP Davis. And I wanted to ask you, for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium, what are your thoughts on RP Davis, and what can our worldwide audience on Sportanarium expect from RP Davis and Odyssey Pro Wrestling?
I think he's got a good future in Odyssey Pro Wrestling. I mean, obviously, he's got his big boxing career and he has experience, okay? And maybe that's not pro wrestling experience, but he has experience on how to become the best, okay? He's going to take that experience. He's going to come into pro wrestling. I mean, he already has. He's coming into pro wrestling and he is dedicated. And I mean, when I was training 2, 3, 4 times a week, there'd be a lot of times I'd be seeing RPD also training 2, 3, 4 times a week, And I'm sat there. I mean, I haven't got that much on in my life. RPD's got an entire family, and he's still finding time to be training all the time. And he's getting in better shape now with the 36-week physique. He's getting into the best shape of his life. I mean, he was already in immense shape because of boxing and because of everything that he knows. And I think he's going to take all of experience and knowledge from boxing, and he's going to come into wrestling, and he's really going to make a name for himself, especially in Odyssey. And you know what? I think if there's anybody who's going to beat Synergy, absolute beasts that are Synergy, it's going to be RPD, because he knows how to box. He knows how to punch. He knows how to knock somebody out. And again, RPD is one of these guys who really welcomed me into Manchester with open arms, even though he's not from Manchester, he's from Blackpool. But again, he's so nice, and the way that he carries himself, not even just in the ring, but backstage, like he's a star already. And I think, I know he's going to carry on training. He's going to stay dedicated, and he's really going to make a name for himself in these next couple of years.
Absolutely. He is definitely going to do that. And that's why we're always excited about RPD and all the great things that he's done and all the great things that he's going to continue to do. And I was curious about this, and Tubit, want to get your thoughts on it. Is you said something interesting. And obviously, we know that RP Davis was a very successful boxer. He was a champion. He only lost once in boxing, and now he's transitioned to being a wrestler. And sometimes we see it where athletes from other sports say, all right, you know what? I'm done with my career. It's easy. I'm going to become a pro wrestler. But what winds up happening is they aren't successful as they thought they might be. I mean, you've become now a really successful guy. You've been a main eventer. You've been a champion. I mean, do you think that that's a hard adjustment for people that they don't realize and actually becoming, let's say, a pro wrestler from being, whether it's an American football player or a boxer or a soccer player slash football player or a basketball player to become a wrestler? Because I think it's a lot harder than some of those athletes in those sports realize. I mean, what's your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I can agree in some circumstances that might be the case. But RPD isn't that. RPD hasn't come into pro wrestling thinking it's going to be easy. RPD's come into pro wrestling wanting to make a name for himself, no matter how hard it takes or how hard it is. That's why he's training so much, because he wants to learn from the best. You know, I used to go training, and I'd go training with Sam Gradwell, who's now on NXT UK. And RPD would be there with Sam Gradwell, really just like prying him for knowledge, because RPD wants the knowledge to be the best. That's what RPD wants. And I think that's what RPD is going to get in the end. And you know what? It might take a couple of years to adjust from boxing to wrestling. It might take him a little bit to get his foot in. It might take him a little bit to find his style and his groove and really get into it. But he's already shown himself to be one of the best. And I've seen him at different promotions, and I've seen the crowd go wild for him. I've seen the crowd react more to him than reacting to some of the other wrestlers who've been wrestling for years and years, you know? I really think that RPD is coming to wrestling almost as a natural for crowd work and for charisma. And I think the wrestling ability is just going to follow him. The way that he's working now, maybe not because of COVID, but the way that he's working with training, the way that he's working with finding out and getting the knowledge of wrestling. Yeah, I think easily in a couple of years, he'll really find his foot and he's going to become one of the biggest stars in the Northwest scene.
Absolutely, no question about it. And as always, a huge shout out to RPD, 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 RP Davis. It was a tremendous honor to have him on the show a couple of times. And also, I know Lakey and Arv got to interview him here on Sportanarium and talk about his great boxing career. So it was always a huge shout out to the great RP Davis. And we are extremely excited to see him back in the ring, just as we're excited to see 2-Bit in the ring, because 2-Bit has become the main event. He is the main event. So listen, the Sports Report wasn't the main event until we had 2-Bit on the show. But 2-Bit, before I get your closing thoughts and ask you about one or two moments that stand out most in your career so far, I wanted to ask you something a little bit personal. And for a worldwide audience here in Sportanarium, I think they would be very curious to know why this is important. Is that right now your uncle is walking 10,000 steps for your father. And talk about what your father meant to you and why is that important to you on a personal level, especially for our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium that may not know why this is so important and special to you.
Yeah, unfortunately, my dad passed away with cancer when I was 11 years old. So, back in 2011. And my uncle that lives in Bangkok, he's now walking 10,000 steps a day to raise money for cancer research. And 10,000 steps might not seem a lot for me and you, but when my uncle, he's in his 40s and he's in Bangkok and where it's hot and sweltery, it's definitely a lot more steps than you realize. And yeah, my dad meant a lot to me, obviously. It's a shame that he passed away, but, I think it's built a lot of resilience in me. And it's crazy now to hear stories about him, about the side that I never got to see, because obviously I was quite young when he passed away. So I saw the side that he presented to me. But growing up now and hearing stories about, maybe when he was a little bit too drunk or, the side that you never hear when you're young. And yeah, it's crazy to see that side of him now. And, I remember he brought me up a little bit tough, not in a bad way, but more in the way that he knew he wasn't going to be there for much longer, We'd work out together. I'm sat there about 10 years old and he's teaching me how to work out. We're going running together. We're going off camping together, we're walking 30 miles down the river Thames, going on this big camping adventure. He was a very adventurous, outdoorsy person, and he really wanted to toughen me up almost for the world. And I think, I think he built up a lot of resilience in me and really gave me a bit of a positive outlook. And as much as a shame and as many negatives as there are to my dad passing away at such a young age, I really think it's sort of changed my outlook. It's really, the positive to it is that it's really built me up and it's made me resilient, especially for stuff like wrestling, and no matter what wrestling knocks me back, no matter whether if I have a bad match or if I'm at training or if I get an injury or anything like that, I know to stay on the positive. I know to stay resilient, and I know to carry on fighting and to carry on going. And that is how I'm going to stay in the main event. And that's how I'm going to go and carry on. Do you know what I mean?
Ladies and gentlemen, a rising tide lifts all boats. And 2-Bit is going to be that rising tide that is going to lift us. Because let your hearts not be troubled. We will get back to normal. And 2-Bit will fight on for his father and his family name, and he will make a difference in the lives of others. And while he may be the Rat King, he may be the Gangster Lord, deep down, he's somebody that will make a difference for many people inside and outside the ring. And that's why we're honored to have him here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, to talk about his journey, to talk about his success, and talk about what he will do in the future as one of the biggest stars for Odyssey Pro Wrestling. And we cannot wait to see him back in the ring in 2021. And 2-Bit, before I get your closing thoughts, I want to ask you for a worldwide audience on Sportanarium. And I know that in such a short amount of time, you've had a lot of success. But I'd like to know if there were 1 or 2 moments that stand out most in your career so far.
You know what? There's more than 1 or 2. There's so many moments that stand out. But I think I've covered quite a few of them in here. Winning the BWR Cruiserweight belt. There's winning the Showcase trophy. There's getting to wrestle Will Carter and Lucas Neon and them big main event matches. There's getting to wrestle Rick Collins and the whole storyline I had with him in Markham. But I think something I haven't brought up yet is my original debut at KOW. And that's quite special to me. Obviously, it's my first ever show I've ever done. But as well as that, it was a triple threat. And it was me, Will Carter, and Lucas Neon, and it was all 3 of our debuts. And after years of being at training, we had to wait until we were 16 to debut. So after 4 long years of training together, week in and week out, we finally, all of that hard work just paid off, and we finally got to debut. And when I think about it, it's very happy memories. Getting to wrestle each other and getting to all debut at the same time in one big match. And the spots that happened as well. In fact, the match is on YouTube. You can probably find it. And it was also in the old venue, which, it closed down and we had to move venues and everything. But it's very nostalgic to look back at that match. And it's also very nostalgic to see how I looked. No beard. Before I was wearing trunks. So I was wearing tracky bottoms and a vest. Maybe not the best look for a wrestler right now, but it's crazy to see how far I've come from there. It's crazy to see how far all 3 of us have come from there, actually. And then at the end of the match, after the match, unfortunately, I took the pin from Will Carter, but I got my revenge in the end, don't worry. And the crowd were chanting, "That was awesome," at the end. And you know what? KOW crowds never chant, "This is awesome." They never chant, "That was awesome." They chant a lot, but just never, "This is awesome." That was very special. That was very special to get to see that. And, coming up with these 2 other lads at the same time and getting to all experience that together, it was a special moment.
Going to be many more special moments in the career of 2-Bit, and we cannot wait to see what the future brings for him in 2021 and the rest of Odyssey Pro Wrestling, because we cannot wait to see normalcy. And we know that Odyssey Pro Wrestling in Markham is definitely going to play a big part in it. We're all excited about pro wrestling returning. We're all excited about seeing everybody that we've had on the show here get back in the ring, especially Rick Marcus and RPD and Synergy and now 2-Bit. And we cannot wait to talk about all the great events that are going to happen, but most especially set sail from Odyssey Pro Wrestling come 2021 later this year. And for you, my friend, I want to give you the floor. I want to give any closing thoughts. Anything you want to share with our worldwide audience here on Sportanarium, to your family, friends, your many fans out there. I also want you to plug all of your social media, whether that's Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, anything else, so we can keep up to date on why you are the Gangster Lord, why you are the King of Champs, and why you have risen from the underclass to be the main event. So for you, my friend, I cannot thank you enough. The floor is yours. Anything you want to share out there to our worldwide audience and to your many fans, and please plug all of your social media so we can get involved and keep up to date with you on this journey you're on. And I can't thank you enough, and the floor is yours.
So my Instagram is TuBit at TU_BYT. Twitter is again TuBit, TU_BYT. You can find me on TuBit Pro Wrestling on Facebook. You can also find me on YouTube. If you just type in TuBit, you'll find it. The channel will come up, one of the top results. And in terms of what I want to say, just before I go, I want to say thank you very much for having me. It's been an honor. My first ever interview. It's been a great time. Thank you very much. As well as that, I just want to say there's a lot of wrestlers in the Brit wrestling scene right now who are doing a very good job and are training and are very hungry to be coming back. And I think when wrestling comes back, especially in the Brit wrestling scene, especially in the Northwest scene, it's going to be very different, but it's going to be very exciting. We're going to see a lot of new faces pop up, but a lot of faces who've been working very hard for this and a lot of faces who deserve it a lot. Thank you very much, Tom.
Well, I can't wait to talk with all of those many great wrestlers. And we can't wait to be that one-stop shop for all the latest happenings when it comes to the world of British wrestling and the scene as a whole. And I know that you're going to play a big part in that, my friend. And it's a tremendous honor for us to have you as your first interview. And I would have never known this. I actually thought about asking you that before we went on the air, but you've done like 1 million promos and 1 million vignettes that it seems pretty natural. It doesn't seem like you've done no interviews before. You seem like you've done hundreds of them. So obviously it's a tremendous honor. And anytime you want to come on the show and talk about anything on your mind, anything in the world of professional wrestling, we will always be here for you. And well, I know that the fans might be booing you. We're cheering you here on the Sports Report. So we are definitely a fan of yours, and we will definitely be cheering 2Bit's name loud and clear and loud and proud each time you step into the ring, my friend. Just except when it's RPD. Well, then we have to kind of be neutral. We have to be like Switzerland. We love RPD on the show, but we'll be neutral then. But every other time you're in the ring, we're rooting for you, my friend. And I can't thank you enough for the opportunity. Congratulations to the success that you've had in the ring. I'm looking forward to seeing you back out there, and I can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much.
As we're here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show with the former BWR Cruiserweight Champion of the World, the KOW Showcase Champion. That's the main event. The latest star for OP Dub, Odyssey Pro Wrestling, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and stay tuned for the legendary Joe Della as he closes today's show with some great music from Sleepy Hollow. And we are here on Sportanarium, the #1 global radio station, and we're at Sportanarium.com, as we were just with former BWR Cruiserweight Champion and KOW Showcase Champion, the latest star for OPW Odyssey Pro Wrestling, the main event, the Rat King 2Bit, as I am the host of the Sports Report, the Reverend Tom Brice, and stay tuned for some brand new Jodo music here on Sportanarium.